Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us, and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. So welcome back to another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. So as always, we're going to light the village bonfire, the candle, come into community space around it, taking a few deep breaths in and out together. Maybe starting to find some of the quietness wherever you might find it. Maybe it's the tiny space between your inhale and your exhale. Maybe you feel it around you or somewhere within you. And from that quietness, just gently start to sense how things, the sound, the noise, your actions, whatever's happening around you kind of bounces gently off that quietness. And how both of those things exist at the same time. And we acknowledge then through that sense of relationship, through that sense of interconnection, interweaving, interplay, acknowledge the land. And all the beings and all the processes, the wise processes that happen within and around us. And that we are just one piece of that. And in honor of that, we say thank you, thank you, thank you. And welcome. So I am super excited. If you've been following along with the podcast for a little while, you know I've kind of been exploring a little bit more conversations around animism, around connection with the land, around deeper relationship, and sort of that interplay between those ancient ways, those ancient wisdoms, and how we sort of start to bring them forward. And so I'm really excited to have today Jason and Sandy of Arterra Wines and Hawkmoth Arts. And I met Jason and Sandy back when I was looking for beautiful outdoor spaces at wineries and things like that for leading yoga classes. And I was just immediately struck by how intentional and reverential their approach is for the land and every aspect of their businesses. So from like the tasting room and gallery design to Jason's approach to growing and evolving wines to Sandy's approach to making art and using sort of found natural materials and really letting the art and the land express itself in ways that then I think invite people back into deeper relationship with it. I really feel like they really embody, their brand Arterra, which is that art of the land kind of. And part of why I was excited to have them on too is I feel like there's a lot of ways we can approach a different kind of relationship with our bodies and a different kind of relationship with the things we make and the things we consume or intake and a larger relationship to the larger world. And and so I was excited to have them on to sort of explore, like, how do we take our values, our orienting values, or maybe even a cosmology, and bring that into whatever it is we're doing, whether, you know, we're healing, or whether we're parenting, or whether we're being business owners, or whether we're making art, or whether we're evolving wine, or whatever that might be. And so yeah, so I'm excited to have them on and to kind of explore, to hear their perspective on some of these things and how that kind of informs what they do in the world and how they are in the world. So welcome, Sandy and Jason. And yeah, so Arterra Wines and Hawkmoth Arts, as I said, are their businesses, and they're a small farm winery and studio gallery, and they both have extensive backgrounds in wine making and in art, and that's sort of been what they've been about their whole lives. And I'll end up linking to their websites in the show notes, and so you'll be able to find out more about kind of their professional stuff, but otherwise we'll just let it come out in the conversation. So yeah, so welcome, guys.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, super excited to be here.
Yeah, and it's so fun to have both of you here too. You know, I just yeah.
Well, at least you got one of us that'll have good things to say.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like to start each episode with you know, inviting you both to kind of introduce yourselves, you know, and that might be professionally, or it might be sort of more socially, and kind of how would people kind of be able to place you in the social fabric of things. So, you know, are there identities, roles, locations, something that helps orient you in the larger world, or what would you like, lineages, you know, what would you like people to know about you?
You go.
Okay. Thank you again, Kate, for doing this. I feel like these conversations are extremely healing for us in the conversation and for those listening. So thank you for this and all of your conversations. I'm Sandy, and just a little correction, it's actually Hawkmoth Arts.
Hawkmoth, sorry.
Like the bug. Yeah, I know I get all kinds of different ones, but I'm sticking to it. So lifelong artist for sure. Highly creative person in all aspects of my life and how I approach life. I'm a mom, and I'm a partner, and I just a very nature connected person. Yes, tree hugger, and I'm okay with that. So educator. I've been an educator for all of my life as well, mostly around the arts, but life in general. And that brings us here.
Okay, so my turn.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know how to answer, so can I 2 for 1 and give the background story of what, in a way, led us to where we are? And that kind of describes my background, because we're a life led here situation. Everybody asks, like, oh, well, like, when did you fall in love with wine and want to start a winery? I'm like, I never really did want to, but it happened. My background story is I grew up in a relatively rural agricultural area, had a really supportive family that involved me in 4-H, and so I worked a lot with farmers and livestock and all that type of stuff. Always loved working in agriculture. Used to drive either a bicycle or a tractor to work until there was time I could drive a car. Once I could drive a car, I worked at a local garden center, and that was when I actually kind of got hooked on the horticulture side of things, went away from traditional agriculture. And so studied horticulture for a bachelor's and master's in the University of Maryland. Simultaneously, I'll say Sandy got her bachelor's and then master's degree, first in art and then in education. So we both have that kind of academic background. After school, I was very fortunate to get a job in Loudoun County, Virginia, as a commercial horticulturist. So I was production assistant for businesses, not homeowners. So people always ask me, you know, oh, I have this tree in my yard and what's wrong with it? And I'm like, I don't even know what that tree is. Sorry. Like, but if you had 10,000 of it and 20 acres, I'd figure it out.
Yeah.
So, and in that job and role was when I was exposed to vineyards. So I kind of shifted focus and attention as the Virginia vineyard industry was growing away from what I thought was a path that fascinated me of nursery crops and greenhouses, and got tied into this vineyard side of things and how that correlates with winemaking, because it's a whole different version of horticulture when you're looking at expressing a wine, or it can be. It can also just be how much fruit can you grow, how inexpensively, and crank it out. But there's a whole spectrum that you can go across with grape growing and winemaking, and that fascinates me. So I learned all about, from knowing people and interacting with people, learned a lot about grape growing, winemaking, started running a vineyard on the side, transitioned to running that vineyard and another winery, setting it up, running it full time, evolved winemaking over that period of time to, we'll talk about more later, the way I'm doing things now. I had kind of developed my own way of doing things, my own style, character, technique, philosophy. And eventually on my side of the story was having a hard time getting that represented properly, working for others. And there was some pull to figure out how to connect the dots of first grape growing, second winemaking based on the grapes, third representing that product. But in and of itself, it was never a specific ambition to run my own business or have my own winery. It's very pleasant, I will simply say, to make wine for somebody else, have a job, if you had the freedom to do expression the way you wanted to. And I didn't feel like that was the case. Simultaneous, and this is critically important on our path of life led here and who we are, is Sandy made a transition from working in the school system as an art teacher and curriculum specialist and integration of arts back into classrooms and projects and multidisciplinary and all these amazing things that she might or might not tell you about. But she left that when our second son was born, who is now 13, close to 14, and spent 5 years, maybe 6, making artworks that were very specifically tied to wine and vine themes and selling them at wine festivals, and did that for, like I said, a number of years. And the demand grew for her to have her own independent studio gallery space, not just be showing up at a festival. And so there was a customer base that was really pushing towards a permanent location. So that was the next step for Sandy. And that was when we started to play with the idea of combining the two crafts so that we didn't have to either me make wine for someone else or her have to sell a whole bunch of trinkety stuff in order to be able to make her artwork. So it was a way for us to both focus on our crafts. So we ended up where we are in business because we are crafts people. So we're constantly getting suggestions, to put it politely, of, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? The other businesses do this. This is what you do in business. And I keep saying, I didn't go into business because I wanted to be in business. I ended up in business because I wanted to make my craft the way I wanted to make it. That's my story.
Yeah. I mean, I love that. And it's funny. That's something I was curious to kind of ask you about and I'm hearing you sort of starting to go down that. So maybe we'll tease that thread out a little bit more, but yeah, how do you just draw the distinction? Because I think in this world, we feel very, there's a lot of socialization and pressure to kind of focus on like what we do, right? The deliverable, the outcome. And, I think some of what you're speaking to here with this process of craft is that it's a process and that it's a co-creation in many ways, that we're like devoted to an approach that then yields something, but that it's really the approach that we're almost more devoted to that then determines the outcome. And so like, is that how you would define kind of the difference between like running a business versus being a craft? Like, you know, I remember like art and craft, you know, there's in art history, you know, there was a time in history where there was like highbrow art, and then there was like craft, and then there've been different moments in history where people have tried to revive craft and sort of an artisanal kind of processes, and I think we're sort of in one of those moments again in history. And so how do you kind of define those differences?
I say you got it.
Okay. Oh, there's so much to say about that. So I'll just start with, I think in my brain, there is a distinction between art and craft. Craft to me is the ability to produce very well. You know, the craftsmanship, the work and the quality of it is the level of craftsmanship. To me, that's something that sort of connects to technique. So it is something that perhaps can be taught. But to tie in the artisan aspect, and this crosses over in anything you're doing in your life, feeling, whatever it is, there's your toolbox, right? There's the craft of it, but then there's the artisan aspect of it. And to me, that ties to process. So what differentiates me from someone who is, quote, a hobbyist, you know, they dabble in things on the side, is that it is a lifestyle. So the inner workings of what happens for me in the studio or Jason in the cellar is the ability to respond to circumstances, to listen for the changes, to never have that end game. This is what I want. You have a vision or a goal, but you know that that's going to change. And it's in that change and flow of process that you get to that place where you feel like, I can call this complete for now. Sometimes I even return to things even after they're complete. So again, there's a lot of things to pull out of the thoughts between artisan and craft and process. But I know that for me, as an artist who works with the media of ceramic, I don't call myself necessarily a ceramicist, because my process is not based on production. My process is based on listening to what is happening, responding, and learning ultimately, which isn't always very much fun. So, and I think my customers really respond to that because they see the evolution in the gallery and the studio, and they can see the difference, because if they've stuck with me long enough, wow, this keeps changing. There's always new, there's always growth and evolution. And again, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but does that make sense?
Yeah, very much. And I mean, I think that some of the things I'm hearing too, and what you're sharing, is sort of that slower pacing, right? Like that almost like an apprenticeship to our approach and our process, right? And like how it's like we show up with our values, right? And our orienting principles, and then we like let that guide us in the making of something, and then along the way, the thing that we're trying to make sort of reflects back to us and becomes a teacher in its own right. And so for me, it's almost like in my work is, you know, whether, you know, I don't really love the term healing, but at this point, but for lack of to be simple with it, I guess, like in the healing world, it's like, I feel like I'm apprenticed to my own values and my own process and where that seems to be guiding me. And like, and then that's then reflecting back and teaching me and evolving me. And so I guess, do you guys feel that's been that way for you in sort of in art and in wine? And I mean, I'm hearing like maybe that's true, but yeah, how has your craft then also become maybe your teacher or helped you evolve? Or what's that kind of co-creative process, like you were just pointing to, Sandy, that like listening and then adapting and responding and shifting what you're making kind of based on that.
You can keep talking if you want.
No, you can have turn.
It's not, no. I look at it all as the word that she used that catches me is evolution. So evolution and response. Those are what art is. So craft is a repeated protocol that you do well. That's what Sandy said. And you can more or less perfect a craft and repeat it. There can be artistry in there. Sometimes there's not, depends on the practitioner. But the way that I see it is being able to either innovate, evolve, or listen, hear, and nuance. So the way that I describe what I'm doing in my side of things is, for example, the name Arterra being art of the land. Terra is the land. So I'm looking to have a true expression of the site. We are doing that by obviously growing the grapes on a piece of property, but then it's the process that expresses that piece of property and only that piece of property, that soil, that weather, those vines. And that's done by, without going into too much detail, native yeast fermentations. We don't add yeast. The yeast is naturally occurring on those grapes in that vineyard, in that place. Nothing is done to change or modify the wines in any way to say, oh, well, this is great wine made over here. How do they do it? Let's apply techniques to make my wine like theirs because that's great wine. None of that's applied. It is all truly minimalist, effectively to unchange the wine as it goes through process and unlock the characteristics that come from that site. So terra. So it's a true terroir wine. It's art of the land, Arterra, because it is an artistic expression of the site. And I say that because it is entirely based on intuitive and perception-based decision making. It is not analytical based. It's not lab work, lab numbers. Every so often, from a craftsman point of view, there is certain checks that should be made along the way, but they should be checks that validate decisions that have already been perceived or made, as opposed to the lab decided for you how the wine should be made. So that's where I look at it, as an artistic expression of the land because of the approach to winemaking. Winemaking is like anything else. It's like making cars. You know, there is a set procedure by which you can repeat. There is a means by which, in conventional winemaking, you intentionally overcome changes in fruit biology, diversity, adversity, whatever comes at you, and you force things to always be the same, because most of our consumer market wants things to always be the same. You go down a different path than that, you have to, as you alluded to, at the core, be a believer in the philosophy and the process as the guiding light and what that expresses. This has tremendous challenges in modern society, and it's what I use the word noise. And I have a really hard time producing my wines to the greatest of their potential when there's too much noise in my life. And that can be things like, right now, inflationary cost cycles that are insane and making business really challenging, right? And there's like, well, how do we overcome this? How do you make the business work? That distracts you when you're going through a COVID epidemic phase, and you're like, well, how do we just serve people, get customers in the door, take care of it, be in compliance, all of that, all new, all reinvented, all recreated? How do you get back to that space of being able to perceive? And it can be very challenging. So now I forget where I'm
Well,
going.
I actually, if you don't mind, Kate, I can step in with
please,
piggybacking on that, because I think that what does help with the noise is the land. So when I'm struggling with either, trying to find the balance between running a business and existing,
Mm-hmm.
and still being creative and active in my studio. And sometimes I just can't, the noise is really loud. That's when I go back to the land. And I know that Jason does too. I speak for him as well. And what that looks like is either just getting out and walking among it and breathing it and standing on it. And I've struggled all of my life with that connection to nature, because a lot of times people do perceive that as being very kitsch. But for us, it is actually real. And my process actually revolves a tremendous amount around connecting to the land and listening to it. It is my teacher and guide. And I know that's true for Jason as well. So when we can get out to the land, connect with it, it reminds us why we're here, what's important. And I think it forces me into a place of stop trying to control, just be, just listen, and have, for lack of a better word, faith. Because as Jason said, we're in a challenging spot right now. We're trying to be who we are. We're trying to do what we do. We feel that we are doing what we were meant to do on this earth, but it's hard, and it's hard times in a lot of different kinds of ways. Big picture, worldwide, our country, and then us and our little business. But when I can pause and get myself out there and do those things that help ground me back to the process. I'm not saying it fixes it, or, it's just the piece that I need to take that next step forward.
Yeah. Let's see. There's a couple threads there that.
There's a lot of threads going on.
There's a lot of threads going on. I know there are a lot of different directions we can take this. I think, well, I think first off, what's kind of coming, like, yeah. So this idea of with the land as teacher, right? And so what, I guess, has the land, a lot of the topics that seem to be really coming up for us as individuals and like in society at large are kind of questions around sustainability, questions around resiliency, questions around evolution and where we're going forward. And so what would you say, kind of within your relationships with the land, what do you feel like the land is teaching you about those things right now?
That's me.
Go ahead.
I don't know if I'm going to answer this the way that you're thinking about it or not. There is being in agriculture in this modern world era is a very interesting space. And there's different sides of this, fence, and none of them are necessarily right or wrong. They all revolve around how we fit in as people on a massively populated planet that is in overall a situation of, to put it bluntly, farmers retire by selling their land to put houses on it. The world is changing. There's less farmland needing to support more people. How do you fit into that? And what does sustainable or natural or organic or any of those? Okay. So part of that is some people that are supporting the population base, whether it's grain crops and however they're going to grow them or whatever it is. And there's tractors and there's diesel fuel and there's all these things going on. There's vineyards that are operated the same way, just like how much fruit can we get out of it? More fruit is better because we're going to sell it for more dollars. And that's how we keep this land in agriculture. And that is one choice. I'm looking at a collective, comprehensive system when I approach our land as it ties to our process, because what we produce as like a clean wine is not a certified organic wine, but it is something that I consider clean in terms of production practices in the cellar, meaning there's not all kinds of bad things going on, adding unhealthy chemistries or toxins or any of that type of stuff. but it all has to start first out in the vineyard. So, and if you're going to do that, to produce something that is clean or sustainable, what does that mean? And to me, it means it's a practice that you can continue doing year after year, decade after decade, century after century, and that land would be able to continue doing that. So that's how that decision making comes in, and it comes in on several scales or factors. So every decision that goes into how I approach agriculture, and sustainable being the key word, is I'm deciding on, is what I'm doing healthy and okay for the planet atmospherically? How many times does a tractor go through a field using how much fossil fuel, putting out how much fumes? Lesser of all those things is clearly better. Perfect? No, right? What's also sustainable for the site? What inputs or outputs coming from it? Are you creating something that eventually is going to damage that site in order to continue to survive and thrive? And third, what is the impact it has on the human that is consuming it, in terms of, their health, and how your health, especially your digestive health, affects your whole brain, body, everything. So I'm choosing based on those three tiers. They're all choices, and there are no perfect choices in this world, because I will bluntly say that the only truly sustainable system, if you really want to break it down, is going back to village-based farming, closed systems, to where we have our livestock on our land, our crops on our land, our animal and human manures going back onto that land. We're feeding ourselves, we're returning to that land. It is a small closed loop. As soon as you have a situation where the grain's being grown in this part of the country, the cattle are being grown in that part of the country, the vegetables are being grown in that part of the country, all based on supplying huge populations, it doesn't work anymore. And even in as small of a vineyard as I'm in, there isn't a perfect system, because I'm balancing a wine that will sell into a market as a high quality wine, which means I am using European varietals as opposed to Native American varietals, which, while improving, won't sell the same as wine into a wine market. I'm using these varietals out of Europe that are inherently more pest and disease susceptible. So there's some more inputs that go into managing that, which means, first and foremost, how do you mitigate that? You mitigate that through taking care of the vine, the plant, the environment. What is the situation that helps that vine naturally fit into this world with less problems? So it's all about airflow, circulation, space, sunlight, drying conditions. How do we manage a vine in an environment that keeps it healthy and reduces the inputs that go into it? And this is a significant step, which facilitates then, when you do have to do a spray program, that you're spraying less often, less diesel fuel, less emissions, softer materials, less materials. Everything is decided that way. And the classic conversation that comes up is, being that I am not certified organic based on the crops that I'm growing, is, well, why not? Wouldn't it be better to be? And I will tread lightly here, because I do believe in organics. I want organic milk. I want organic meat. I want organic. Tell you that organic is not in and of itself the answer. There's quite a number of things that are approved in the organic system that are quite horrible. And organic systems are not definitively sustainable systems by any means. They could be if they were farmed and chosen decidedly properly, but just because it's organic doesn't make it okay. So we're making these choices every day about how to keep the land healthy, the people healthy, the planet healthy, and have that also evolve into a product that matches a quality that, in a tiny business model like ours, can hopefully target the margins to sustain the economics of the business. Sorry, really long answer.
No, that's great.
You can see how that's a challenge though, when you have to sell the product because, well, what labels work for you, right? So we can't really be organic. Nobody really understands what natural means. Clean, same thing. So it's kind of like we're trying to tell this story and have this impact, and being heard, as you know, in small business is a challenge in and of itself. But then we don't fit into any of these labels that people want, right? Because they want to put everything in a box to make consumerism easier. So I think it comes down largely to scale. And for us, we very purposefully stay small so that we can better make these choices and stay focused on quality. And it's the opposite of what American consumerism is. And we hear it. Why aren't you going to grow more? Where are all of the rest of your vineyards? When are you going to add on to the building? And, you know, all of these things. And they can't accept that we can actually be really high quality and be small, and that's okay.
Well, part of being small is critical, because when I talk about the farming system, and I do not mean to be critical of organic systems, because like I said, that's what I buy and eat and drink and all. But I sincerely believe that at least within my region and area, because of how we're scaled and the focused handwork style attention that we can put into it, that I believe my operating system is better for the planet, the site, and the people than if I had to do that within the confines of a certified organic system. Could I possibly do it? Yes, I would lose probably a larger percentage of fruit. And yes, I would probably be spending 3 times as much time and money on a tractor spraying organic materials and the diesel fuel and fumes and all that. So we're making choices that are scale based, and it's the same thing in the cellar. How do you express the wine as a high quality wine when you're doing it in a very natural based system? A philosophy of nature makes it best. Let nature create it. Create the environment for the wine to evolve. Don't make the wine. And if you're going to do this, you have to be scaled to where you can be very attentive. There is no, as far as I can tell, way to scale up my approach to grape growing and winemaking and have it be as sound as it is. The only way to scale it up is to add a lot more people. But if it is based on that certain individual, that whatever the right words are, born, not born, developed, evolved, as able to perceive and intuitively make these decisions, you can't just add people and assume that they're going to be able to do that, because we're all suited to different things on this planet. So I can't scale up by cloning myself.
Right.
So
not yet anyway.
That's part of why scale is critically important. And it is a challenge societally, because what we get all the time is we're located on a little side road and a more remote site that people have to like be told about our place to get there. And they walk in the door and they're like, oh, I don't know, because like we were just down the road right off the highway where there's like 100,000 cars going by every day, and there was like 5 times as many people in their place. Like, why don't you have all the people in your place? And I'm like, because I'm not located on the highway, and a crowd to me doesn't mean success. But in America, bigger and more crowded means success. So even with people that are like trying to give it a try, you still have to educate that bigger isn't better.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're speaking to there, because I feel like that is, I mean, it's amazing how deeply internalized a lot of those beliefs become, you know, and, you know, so much of what you're speaking to is like, how do we embody, you know, I think a lot of people, I think there's, you know, I talk to people a lot and I hear people use that phrase, like the, you know, the shift in consciousness, right? And I think there is a lot of that happening in the world right now. And I think that's really awesome. But then a shift in consciousness isn't enough, because there's still so many ways that we are living the old paradigms. So while we may in theory like have some kind of theoretical understanding of what sustainability means to us, or what scalability or environmentalism, you know, or whatever that may be, right? Sort of that artisan craft, you know, kind of that, you know, that shift. And we're seeing, I mean, part of why organic developed is there's buying power behind it, right? So there is, people are interested in that. And we're just taking, you know, I think part of what you're pointing to, Jason, are the ways in which like the label organic has sort of, is still trying to apply these large scale monoculture models, but how do we do that, quote unquote, organically? And it's like, but large scale monoculture is never going to be sustainable, because that's not, if you look at the world, that's not how nature naturally expresses itself. And so that point that you're making about like really nature does it best, right? It's been around for a long time, and it has life cycles in it, and it has its ebbs and flows. And you know, and how do we come into it and listen and respond and intuit and like help, you know, be a part of helping it express itself, because we're nature too. And so there's that relationship there, and that like mutual expression kind of that's happening. Like it's helping us express ourselves, we help it express itself, you know. And somehow then like something is evolving in that process of kind of that co-creation and that mutual expression. And you know, and yeah, to do that can't happen on this massive scale, generally speaking. I mean, the ripples of it become massive, but it almost does have to be these sort of smaller pockets.
Which, sorry, if I'm
Yeah,
jumping.
go for it. Yeah, please.
Just saying what you're saying is the inherent challenge societally, system-wise, is massive cities. You can't have little farms in the city supporting the population in the city. So the population requires a mass production model, and organic is one approach to trying to connect within that massive model. Whereas sustainable, so I believe more in local and know your farmer than I do believe in organic, but I'm up against the same choices as everybody else. So that is really where, when I say the challenge is that the system is what it is, and how do you work with that? Well, these little like community-based farms, regions, outlets. And so rural or semi-rural or suburban, you might be able to go to your local vegetable farm. You might be able to go to your local winery, but somebody's not going to drive out of Washington, D.C. an hour and a half every week to go pick up their bag of vegetables. It has to come to them.
Right.
And that's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love what you're saying too about just that they're all choices, you know, and we're all trying to make our choices, and we're making them from maybe different parameters or from different places. And that's sort of one of the things too I was interested in asking or kind of exploring with you guys is, I guess, like what do you feel like, you know, I mean, you've sort of touched on this a little bit already with sort of naming, like making decisions based on the future of the land, you know, the present and future of the land. So what are the decisions that will allow the land to keep being healthy? What are the decisions that will allow the people who then consume the wine to keep being healthy, you know? But what would you say are your sort of, in that world where it feels like there's a lot of noise to the contrary, in the world where it feels like we're having to constantly make imperfect choices, but doing the best we can to make them, what do you feel like are your orienting values around wine? And then maybe Sandy, for your art, you know, what is, or even, I don't know if you would use the term cosmology, but what's kind of the worldview or the belief system or the orienting values that feel like they, I mean, the land, I think, is one of them, but what kind of keeps you like on your path?
Yeah. So Kate, you've been to our tasting room, so you know that we have the philosophy of wabi sabi written on the walls in the space. And that is something that I personally come back to. I think Jason does too. And our staff always reminds us when we're frustrated and they just, wabi sabi, you know, it is actually an Asian philosophy of beauty. So it really talks about things being of their natural state, and whatever that looks like is beautiful. So imperfect edges, roughness, rawness, the process of it is the beauty of it. So for me, coming back to that philosophy of authenticity is huge for us. So when we make a decision, is it coming from an authentic place in relation to the land, in relation to our customers, in relation to our staff, in relation to our processes? So that's a huge part of who we are in our core values and our honesty with ourselves and our process.
You nailed all that part. And so if you would like, I will just add specifics in terms of how this applies to me and farming. When it comes to the wine in the cellar, the golden rule is patience and don't overreact. And that's so hard in this world. Like, you see something wrong, you just want to like do something. Most of the time in like a wine cellar, it's very gentle movements that then require time to respond and rebalance themselves. The cellar is a constant rebalancing of things. It's finding equilibriums and kind of minimizing hard swings and not having fast fixes to things. So that's very contrary to the way our society is focused. In terms of the vineyard, for me, where I find peace getting back out into it, and I don't work in it constantly because I can't put the hours in. So I have an amazing guy named Joaquin who does tremendous amounts of handwork out there, and Kelly's doing handwork out in the vineyard, and I need those people because it's too many hours. But I have to be out there enough to connect to it, to understand it, to know where the vines are at, what direction they're going, and how do you relate to a vine, and how do you understand, and how do you optimize and find that harmony. And it ties back to philosophies of natural energetic flows. So I have learned a lot and adopted certain aspects that come from biodynamics, but I'm certainly not biodynamic. But I do believe in the energetic flows and natural cycles of an annual system, an annual year, how that affects a crop. In my case, how that affects a perennial woody vine crop. And I simply, in its simplest definition, is there's a couple phases of the vine growth that we're really looking at. And one of those is the springtime, this very like upward energetic growth pattern. So energy coming from the soil, partnering with that sunlight at the leaf, building up a healthy canopy for a healthy fruit set. And we have from bud break in the springtime, typically April, but it can be all over the place, this upward growth pattern conceptually through the summer solstice, as the days are getting longer, the light is getting stronger, and the vine is growing up. Okay, then we have a phase where, because I'm focused on quality, fruit characteristics, wine quality, you do have to hit this phase of the vine of downward or inward internalizing, and it is the focus on ripening. And it comes from what they always talk about in wine as like a stressed vine makes better wine. So to take 2 seconds to explain that is, if a vine is happy and healthy and just keeps growing up, it just wants to be a tree because it's like, I'm going to live here forever. This place is great. I'm just going to get bigger. And yes, I make fruit because I'm a vine, but who cares? Right? I'm here and I'm good. Whereas if it's stressed, which is threatened to a degree, not to a point where you will like damage the vine, but to a point where it perceives, if I stay here, this might be risky. I don't know if this is the best place to be. There's stress on me. So I'm going to try and go somewhere else. How do I go somewhere else if I'm a vine? It goes somewhere else by seed dispersal. How does it facilitate seed dispersal? It maximizes color, flavor, and aroma to attract animals. The eat that fruit to carry the seed off. So as soon as it's stressed, it's no longer focused on growing leaves and shoots. It wants to make really good fruit so that seed can be dispersed. Well, how do we do that? We let more grasses and weeds grow underneath that vine. We try and remove as much water as we can from a soil profile. So we're on rockier soils, steeper soils, plant it up and down the row so the water can run down the hill through the soil, not across the slope, where we're going to actually create with those root rows like dams or terraces that are trapping water. So we need to minimize the water. We need to minimize the nutrient availability during that phase. We thin out the canopy so there's better airflow, there's less sunlight interception. You slow the vine down through this stress. You create a vine that when it shifts from upward growth to ripening, downward growth, starting at the summer solstice, it then takes all that energy it built up in that canopy and it's transferring it down into the fruit. As it's wrapping up that phase, it's transferring that energy down into the trunk and into the root system as its survival mechanism for getting through the winter, because it knows it needs everything it can if this is not a perfect place to grow. Until next spring, you kind of like help it pep itself back up and you find that balance. But you definitely have to follow this like phases of the year energetics, even in its simplest form of an annual year.
I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of what we do is having that connection to seasonality. And it's this similar for my process too, not through growing grapes, but just what's available to me to gather and the different times of year and accepting those different phases, not just from what you're producing, but from what you're feeling as well. So for me, I flow right along with those movements. So I feel the upward growth in my creative energy in the spring because things are growing and they're vibrant and they're green and I'm excited and I've got energy and I'm moving and my body responds to the next phase as well, that more inward. I can feel it coming, I can feel it happening, I can feel it in my process. And I think learning to embrace that is huge. You know, if we stay in this constant production, must produce, we have a business, we have to sell, it's very depleting. But when you go with that seasonal flow, which we're lucky and blessed to be exposed to, it definitely helps with the flow of your creative process and your response and your ability to respond. But it's, you know, I have to remind myself, wait, this is where I'm at right now. Slow down. Okay. So.
Yeah. There's so many. There's so much noise, like you said, you know, like you called it earlier to the contrary, right? Like you were just saying that constant production and that constant output and that, you know, and I love what you're describing. I mean, I know for me, I found that, that was like an incredible part of my healing journey, my personal healing journey, and sort of my journey back to my body, you know, out of college. You know, I mean, all through school, I feel like it's about your head and your output and you're thinking the thoughts and, you know, you're just supposed to sort of constantly be able to do that and generate that. And it felt really disconnected from actual tangible output, you know, like, okay, at the end I have a paper maybe, but you know, it's still all very in the realm of theory. And so, you know, and I found how much my own body was feeling the hurt of being disconnected from those cycles, from those seasons, from that deeper sense of like, right, my body is nature, my body is the land, and the land, you know, and kind of vice versa, you know, and I'm part of this system and I'm animal and I'm land and I'm, you know, all of these other things. And then, when I started working, you know, I most of my background is more in vegetables. But, you know, I have, gosh, at this point, probably over 10 years experience, you know, working in sustainable agriculture in different ways and with different choices, you know. But and I remember like how powerful it felt to be eating food that was grown, you know, that was the right food at that, you know, I was just eating what was growing at that time based on that season, and found that naturally my body wanted the waterier vegetables of the summer when it's hot. You know, you don't want the dense sweet potatoes and the dense, you know, whatever. I mean, even with all the activity I was doing and all the manual labor I was doing, it was still perfect for what my body actually needed to eat. And then as things got colder and I wanted to move slower and I needed a little more heat in my body, you know, then the denser foods start coming available and growing. And I remember like, yeah, how different carrots are, the overwintered carrots that really store up the sugars, you know, what you were talking about to get through the winter. And so in spring, those carrots are just so much sweeter. And you can tell the carrots that have been slightly stressed, you know, because they've stored up more sugar, as opposed to the carrots who were stressed in the summer and then maybe got more bitter. but yeah, so it's beautiful. And I mean, I love that you guys are kind of pointing back to beauty and that space of like beauty as an orienting value in a lot of ways, you know. And so I guess that sort of feels like maybe kind of how we start to land the plane a little bit today. But you know, just my sort of like, in a world that feels increasingly sort of scary and survival oriented, like, why does beauty matter, I guess? And that's sort of, yeah. Or what's your take on that?
Well, I don't know. I'm a visual artist. So at the end of the day, there is a product. And yes, the process is the magic for me. But when I put that piece out and I've sort of disconnected from my energy in the piece, my energy is always there, but that doesn't really matter at that point. Because to me, when that transitions into the space where it's available to be seen by a customer brings their energy then to that piece, and that connection is made for them. It reminds them of a place they grew up. It reminds them of their grandmother's farm. It reminds them of a dream they had. Beauty maybe is a label for what that is. So it is a connection that is unspeakable, and it's very emotionally felt. So beauty is something that lands in people and it looks all different ways, right? In history, there's canons of beauty, right? So when you say beauty, you have to not think about that. That's what the wabi-sabi is. So beauty is this emotional connection that brings this unspeakable contentment. And it's thrilling for me to create something that has an energetics for me, but that energetics carries on as it becomes a part of someone else's life in their way. So that's my visual art sort of description of beauty, and it originates in the land for me. My process originates in walking, gathering, collecting, learning, listening. And to me, every aspect of that process is beauty. And it doesn't always, some pieces flow better than others, but I accept that I like it much better when it flows better, for sure. It feels better to me. But it's always surprising when I put out that piece that I think is just, no, gosh, it's really horrible. No one's going to love it. And it sells right away because that person was just waiting for it. Or a piece that did flow beautifully for me and I put it out and nobody buys it for months, you know? So anyway, that's a little different topic, but essentially that is what beauty is for me and why it matters, because I think it helps ground us in what we are all ultimately seeking, is that contentment, that just not even necessarily joy in a way, more of that contentment, that calm, that knowing, that belonging, that feeling.
And even the connection too. I think you used the word connection at one point, you know?
Yeah.
I've got two answers if you're ready for me.
Yeah. Bring it on.
Phase one is specific to Sandy, but I think does apply to my wines, is beauty as the word critically important in art and has been somewhat dismissed. But the reason that it's critically important is because it's the reminder of what you're taking for granted in the world. It brings people back. The way that I say that, and that's that connection you're talking about. The reason I say that is Sandy makes these amazing, beautiful artworks based on grape leaves, forest leaves, captured and expressed as individual leaf forms in clay. They're amazing. And people are like, this is so beautiful. I love these leaves. This is incredible. And I'm always thinking, like, why is this beautiful as a leaf captured in clay? And nobody really thinks about how beautiful the leaves are on the actual trees. It's taken for granted. So this reminds people of the world that they're in and the connection that they've forgotten. So it brings people back to a core value of the actual world is actually beautiful and amazing, right? And people get caught up because they live in environments that are fast-paced, challenging, lots of concrete and roads and walls and things like that. The wine is the same thing, just because a constant expression in response to my wines is how did you get this much flavor out of a grape? It doesn't taste anything like other wines. There's so much flavor, fruit-focused flavor. And it brings people back to, what is wine? What should it taste like? How is it made for it to taste this way versus other wines? Like, and it reconnects people to, oh yeah, wine is actually made from a fruit, like for real. So I think that's a part of beauty in the art world that I think is like very important. And then in terms of how this all connects to me in this business and so forth, and those decisions that are being made, is I'm a firm believer in, I don't know, you had an original question that this is what popped in my head. I don't know where.
Go for it.
We went around and around. But I'm a firm, strong believer in the saying that we know. And that is a
Can
guiding.
you actually repeat that again? You cut out for a moment just for that saying. That's so funny.
That's the modern world of the computer. I believe in the saying, be the change you want to see in the world. And there's an important twofold aspect to this. So it means, like, I make my decisions based on that, but I will forewarn anyone and everyone that if you think there's issues or problems with the world or the society or the system or the structure, and you don't agree with them, and you're going to make a change to be what you would rather see, you immediately are going against the grain, and immediately you're embarking on a far more challenging path, because the structure, the system is stacked against you, which means you really do need to figure out, and we struggle with this all the time, why am I doing it? Is it worth it? You know, what's the focus? What's the purpose? You have to, like, really at your core believe in the value to push on through a system that you're working against. And I have not listened to all your podcasts, but the one that I remember listening to, it was number 5 or something. And it was talking about the system. And the wonderful lady said, if you don't agree with the system and don't want to participate in it, create your own system. And we're doing that. And it's not easy. But I can't stop doing it.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. Well, and I think that, you know, ties back into that beauty and why does it matter, in the sense of, like, because I think there's an element to beauty that, like you said, is both really present and an invitation to reconnect, and also aspirational enough that it can kind of like pain can be that spark that makes us want to make a change, but we don't grow good things or express beautiful things or create beautiful things if pain is always the instigator, right? Like we have to be in service to something that feels more positive, generative, hopeful, whatever the right word is, I think, to stay that course even when it's really hard. And that's, I think, where maybe beauty actually starts to come in, is like, yeah, it's like an invitation to reconnect, but it's also, and I mean that distinct from sort of that, like, I think like Plato kind of idea of like beauty as sort of this ideal that then everybody is like sort of a imperfect, like, attempt to kind of recreate that. So I'm not like saying it sort of in that sense of things, but in the sense of like, what gets us out of bed every day, and like some days it's really hard to get out of bed. Like, and the world feels hard, and yeah, it's easy to rush through things and not see the beauty around us. And then like that sunset catches your eye, or the sunrise, or you hear a particularly beautiful bird song, or the other day I was walking through the woods and all of a sudden something kind of caught my eye and I stopped and I turned and there was like a deer just like in this streaming, like just this little patch of sunlight, and it was like all like, oh, hello you, and I was like, oh, hello, and we just stood there for a moment and just like breathed together. And and so you're right, I think there's the beauty in that, and then there's what we create in response to that, and I think that's sort of some of that impermanence too, like the art. It's like, I heard someone say one time that it's one of the most human things to hear and sing back. Like that's what we humans are really here to do, is hear and sing back, hear and sing back. And so, I think creating art, or doing healing work, or creating wine, or whatever it might be, in response to the beauty that we're feeling, the beauty that we're seeing, right? If we see the beauty and then we're singing what we're seeing into the world in whatever way we sing that into the world, right? That there's somehow that appreciates the beauty, and relationality and belonging and connection and these other things that I think we're really hungry for right now. And
we have to try to contribute them. If I
mm-hmm.
want to live in a world that is full of beauty and positivity and connectedness and community, I'm not going to say I'm there day to day. If you know people that work with me, I'm not always super chipper cheery, but you have to try to bring yourself back to that if that's the world you'd rather be living in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can't create a world that looks more like that if we're constantly responding fearfully to fear or something else. It's like you feed where you're, what we give attention to, we're feeding. And and that's not in a bypassy kind of way. We can acknowledge when we're angry, we can acknowledge when we're sad, we because again, in that sort of, it's not perfect, and it's all the process itself is beautiful. All of that stuff becomes beautiful too, in its ebbs and flows and in its waves and in its like role in the process. The stress that you're talking about, like just the right amount of stress makes the grapes like even better, and so it's in theory right. The same with humans, although man, it sucks when you're in that place. Why can't my
that's perspective, because otherwise we have a tendency to take things for granted. So we need perspective.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. Is there anything else that you feel like wants or needs to be said as we're kind of wrapping up here?
No, I feel complete in the conversation. I want to thank you because, like I said in the beginning, this is just something that's very helpful for us, the three of us speaking to each other, but also everyone that's listening. And it's a powerful thing what you're doing. And I've enjoyed many of your talks at this point. So keep going and great job. Thank you so much for being willing to speak with us.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I'll say the same thing is thank you for having courage. And I would encourage everyone to have courage in this world, because there's a lot of hard conversations, because it's not a perfect world. And if no one engages them head on, there's no, I don't know, improvement, progress, like what's the right word? I don't know. But we can't avoid the problems. And so I sincerely hope when I do a talk like this that I didn't offend anyone with anything that I said. But at the same time, if no one says things that might be appreciated by one person and challenging to another person, then we're not really talking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. A couple conversations ago, I think it was in my conversation with Tammy, where she was talking about conscious wayfinding, and that idea of setting the temperature versus just reading the temperature, and so kind of that, and she was speaking energetically, but that sense of like, are we standing here and just sensing what's happening around us, or are we also taking a certain amount of courage and responsibility for like setting the temperature around us? Like, so it's not, yes, it's a both and, like we can't just, we've all met and been probably at different moments that person who's walked through the world and just expected everything and everyone else to just kind of like fall in around us, and then we've also all probably experienced and been at moments that person who's like kind of hiding in the background and just sensing everything that's happening around, and has maybe not as much sense of solidity and self, but can sort of know everything and everyone else around us really, or seem to, know all of that really well. And, and so there's, here again, I think that piece about the listening and the responding, and sort of what you were talking about with the intuitive part and the creative process, and, that whole, and coming back to the land and being willing to be taught by the land, but also being, in service to the land, and emulating it in some ways. And so there's, and also knowing what's yours to do, that sort of that scalability, that small, that this feels like this is my part to contribute, and this is what I'm meant to do in the world, and holding on to that. So yeah, there's that combination of, setting the temperature, and then also hopefully listening to then what kind of comes back at us as we do that, and then continuing to like evolve that conversation. But yeah, I hear you on that. Yeah, it can feel risky. It feels really risky, and on a nervous system level, that's normal actually, for it to feel sorry, a second, I wasn't sure if an alert was about to make a big noise on my computer. Yeah, it can feel, that whole saying they say in the, in a lot of nervous system work, they talk about, how the tallest flower is the one that gets mowed down first, So there's that, like, it feels risky to kind of stick our head up and have an opinion and like have a perspective and say like, this may not be exactly your perspective, and this perspective was grown based on the environmental factors that contributed to my personal evolution. That doesn't mean, and it's my truth, and that doesn't mean it's hard truth, but it's still worthy, and it still has something to offer to the larger conversation and the larger ecosystem of conversations, and the larger evolution, that's happening. And I think, yeah, so I love that. That you bring that up, and that's certainly what I'm hoping to do. And yeah, so thank you.
Well, that's it. Really enjoyed it. Really
Beautiful.
Appreciate it.
So yeah, so I'll have your website in the show notes and everything, but is there anything else you would like to sort of share about like your businesses, or ways people can find you or support you, or
just check out our website. If you're available or somewhat nearby, the best way to connect with us is to come see us.
Yeah, Delaplane, Virginia.
Yeah.
For anybody listening.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful spot to come relax, see the artwork, taste the wines, take a deep breath on a mountainside in the forest, a lovely little vineyard. And for those of you who are not geographically accessible, Sandy is developing her website where you can see the artwork and at some point in time potentially get some from the website, and the wines can be shipped, and doing our best to mitigate that for people who might want it is if you get 4 bottles, they ship to you free. So it'd be the same cost as showing up.
Wow. All right.
Right.
And if you go, don't bring any party trolleys.
Or get a good driver.
You won't make it up the hill. So
yeah. Oh my gosh, I remember that. I was sitting in the tasting room and seeing a party trolley get stuck.
oh, that's right. Yeah.
You guys weren't even at the winery that day, and you had to get called back to come get the tractor and like help tow the trolley out. It's always something, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Adaptability.
I was trying to find the word. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being here. And so, yeah, I'll just invite us and everyone listening to just kind of take a few deep breaths in and out and just, let the conversation percolate in. And, I mean, one of the things I love, yes, there was, a lot of moments where we were speaking specifically to agriculture and ecosystems, but I should say, and I know how much, as I learned more about agriculture through working it, like how much that informed my own understanding of my human body and my relationships and understand like how much, what Jason was talking about with the biodynamism, how much that has to teach us about the world that we live in and how we can start to emulate and try and create. There's an approach for organizations that's about sort of, how do we start to self-organizing principles as a theory is like, how do we start to create organizations and systems that actually mirror ecological and environmental truisms and realities, and that idea that nature has processes in place and they're about sustainability inherently, and so how do we start to like really bring that in? And so so I invite anybody listening to just really let the conversation trickle in and let it maybe start to shift how you view the world and then maybe also how you view yourself and what might be possible. So organizationally. So thank you everyone for being here. And, if you enjoyed this episode, share it, help spread the word, like it, rate it, whatever all the different things are. And you can always find me through kate@wildsacredjourney.com. And I'll see you next time around the fire.